Let me welcome our first great speaker of the day today, Jennifer Rogers. Jennifer, very excited to have you with us. Jennifer is an experienced learning executive with a demonstrated history of strategic workforce transformation and capability development. She specializes in workforce optimization and has led large strategic initiatives in several global high-risk, high-compliance industries, including oil and gas, mining, aviation, and financial services. Jennifer is passionate about leading cutting-edge innovation in the learning space, with particular attention to strategies that proactively prepare the workforce for the future of work. Very much looking forward to your presentation, Jennifer, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Jose. So we'll start today's presentation by really just orienting to the mission at hand. This presentation is certainly focused on accelerating people potential and the ways in which we really prepare people proactively for the change that's coming. And as Jose said very eloquently at the top of this intro, we are in a time of quite a bit of change at the moment. So hoping today's presentation will be particularly relevant for you all. A bit about who I am as we get started. I think it's important to kind of articulate the kinds of work that we do and the passion that drives us. And so for me, Jose's already given a bit around who I am and what I do. For me, my passion is really about creating and cultivating those vibrant learning ecosystems that really captivate and catapult the workforce forward. And we'll talk more about what that means throughout the course of this presentation. But essentially, what I'm really focused on are our colleagues in the workforce and the ways in which we can really engage them and set them up for great success and development within our organizations, which we know then drives quite a bit around operational excellence and the continuous organizational strategy that organizations have in play. So we'll start off at the top of this presentation by just talking a little bit about what may be very obvious to us at this moment in time, but the change that is happening to us in the world, in our workforce, and in the work itself. So first, talking a little bit around our changing world. And the elements of this slide actually were pulled together by a gentleman called Peter Fisk from some great resources like BlackRock, Bloomberg, Deloitte, McKinsey, PwC, World Bank, lots, you see them on the slide. But basically what it's talking about is megatrends predicted from 2020 to 2030. And as we look at the fact that we're in 2020 this year, and it's already been quite a year of change for us all, it's interesting to kind of reflect with regards to the changing world and the megatrends that are predicted. So we start to see things like shifting economic power, climate change, resource scarcity, technological breakthrough, which I think we've talked quite a bit about this week in the sessions, demographics, social change, rapid urbanization. These are all megatrends that impact all of us across the world and really are very relevant to our organizations, because our organizations really need to be positioned in a way in which they can be prepared for the change that's taking place. And as you can see with these megatrends, there's a heavy people involvement with all of the change that's taking place. And it's very important for us to stay focused on the megatrends as we see them today and the megatrends as they start to develop over time, because obviously this is a fluid situation and continues to change. But as we start to look a little bit deeper with regards to change that's taking place, there's also change in our work. This particular graphic comes from a great study that was done by the McKinsey Global Institute in 2018. And the reason that I like to show this is because it focuses specifically on energy and mining as an industry. If you kind of take a look at what's represented here, it's speaking about sector skill shifts that are predicted by the year 2030. And it's actually showing which skills we would predict to see fewer of, or less of a need for, I guess I should say, by 2030, and which ones we actually will need more of. This may not be surprising to any of you, but it does highlight the need to really be prepared as organizations. Just a few things to highlight as we look at this. We see a general decrease in skills required in terms of physical and manual labor and basic cognitive skills, and then increases in skills around or usage of skills around higher cognitive thinking, social and emotional skills, and technological skills. In particular, in energy and mining, we see decreases in the use of skills like general equipment operation and navigation, inspecting and monitoring, basic data input and processing, and basic literacy, numeracy, and communication. When we start to think about that, that's a big shift for the workforce in terms of that decrease. We also see an increase in creativity, complex information processing and interpretation, entrepreneurship, initiative taking, leadership, managing others, advanced IT skills and programming, and basic digital skills. So once again, quite a shift with regards to the skill that's required to do the work as we get to 2030, which is not that long from now. So how do we once again ensure that our workforce is proactively prepared for what's ahead? And we're not waiting until the work actually changes to start upskilling people for what's to come. And then additionally, on top of our changing world and our changing work, our workforce is changing as well. This also comes out of that same study from McKinsey, and it talks about our changing workforce. There are mindset shifts that are taking place. We see that already around cultures of lifelong learning and development opportunities. Our colleagues expect development opportunities at this point, which is great. An emergence of new collar jobs, which really is speaking about, as those skills shift, allocating work in different ways across our organization with the creation of new jobs that are kind of middle skill positions that bridge a gap between one and the other. We'll talk a little bit about that further as we get through the presentation. Workforce composition, so obviously the gig economy changes a little bit around the composition of our workforce. Organizational structures in terms of how our organization is put together and the ways in which it can be more dynamic and agile and adjust to the work that needs to take place rather than being fixed hierarchical models, as well as C-suite and HR changes that are required to make all of this happen. Really the CEO mindset and then down into the organization with regards to organizational design and the ways in which we empower our people amidst this change. So lots going on here with regards to the change ahead of us. And so in today's presentation, we'll spend a little bit of time diving deeply into three different main areas. Because as we look at operational excellence and the organizations of today and tomorrow, we really want to make sure that we focus on a few different things. One, reducing variation in processes, in equipment, in all of the things that need to be present to really drive operational excellence. But also at the same time, recognizing the diversity in our workforce and actually empowering and leveraging that diversity to really help us to be agile and adapt in times of change. Which leads us to reimagining the workplace and the ways in which we actually exist as organizations and work together. So we'll talk about all three of those things in some detail as we go forward. We'll start by talking a little bit about the reduction of variation. And this part is really about the ways in which we can make standards, processes, equipment, and parameters all accessible, and there's a key emphasis on the word accessible. One size does not fit all for our workforce and our colleagues. We have colleagues distributed across the world in different cultures with different backgrounds and different experiences, really different ways that they work. So I'll share with you a few concepts to think about as an organization around that reduction in variation, and more importantly, reduction in variation at scale in an accessible way for the workforce. So one of the key points that we start to talk about here is really continuously being able to describe the work and not the org structure. This is something that needs to happen consistently, and we need to categorize our areas of work, identify risk, and measurable operational targets so that we can start to shift and move as an organization as these changes occur. It's much easier to do that if we're describing the work versus describing the org structure, which most likely will change. We'll dig into that in a little bit more detail here in a moment. We also want to continuously define the capabilities for our workforce. Once again, by the work, by the discipline, not by their job title, because once again, we know jobs are shifting, skills are shifting. We want to maintain multiple scenarios simultaneously, which we'll also look at from a strategic planning perspective, which is very important to our organizations that have some rigor around scenario planning. We want to create reusable objects that are multimodal and multi-channel. I'll explain that to you with regards to what that looks like, and deploy into the flow of work. So we want to make sure that, once again, that everything is accessible to people in the way in which it needs to be accessible to them based on who they are, the language they speak, the culture that they come from, the type of work that they do, their operational area, all of those types of things. And finally, track the behaviors that our workforce exhibit via something called XAPI, which I'll explain, but is essentially a data standard that exists. It's open source and allows really a very robust view around our workforce, what they're doing, and how they're developing and growing. So we'll start off by talking a little bit about this idea around kind of standardizing capability expectations and being dynamic about this. And the example on the screen is really speaking a little bit around the ways in which a lot of organizations are starting to use artificial intelligence and human validation to do this work and to continue to make it dynamic over time. We know that the capability expectations are going to change. We can predict what those are, but we may or may not always have it right. And so what this illustrates is just one example of the ways in which organizations are actually using AI. So in this particular example, this actually shows the capability to be able to ingest thought paper or thought leadership, white papers, publications, patents, websites, anything that's out there that gives us a viewpoint with regards to what's happening in the industry and in parallel industries, which helps us to continuously maintain a dynamic set of capability expectations for our workforce. Artificial intelligence is not perfect. It has to be trained, and there is a human validation piece that goes into this. But once again, the more that we enable AI to help us with this, the more we can proactively start to develop our colleagues in these areas. The next piece really speaks to capability matrices and scenario planning. Once again, we want to organize the work by disciplines. So things that, that might come into play. Most recently I've worked with mining. So mining, processing, finance, HR, what are the disciplines of work, data analytics that might take place, and what are the scenarios that we think can play out? This is once again an example of the ways in which organizations are starting to actually incorporate this into scenario planning. So what are the scenarios that we think could play out in our industry, and what are the different set of capabilities that we might need in these different scenarios? For example, we all just recently saw the successful return of the SpaceX vessel back to Earth. I know we were really excited about that in our family. What does the commercialization of that look like? Is that a scenario that we all need to be thinking about, particularly in this industry? Perfect example of the ways in which we can actually hold multiple scenarios simultaneously and continuously dynamically feed those scenarios with the capability that the workforce may need, which once again is super important in an era of change. The next piece to really focus on and think about here is multimodal, multi-channel experiences. So as I was saying before, our colleagues are in different places. They work in different ways, and we want to reach them in the flow of their work. So essentially, what we don't want to do is build different ways to reach them in isolation from one another. So essentially, building an e-learning course and putting something up on a web page and building a native app and doing some remote support, all in isolation from one another, because that's dangerous. We can't version control that, and it's incredibly resource intensive to make that happen. So the organizations that are best positioned at this point with regards to even the current scenario are organizations that are already doing something called single sourcing. And what that means is we're creating these assets, regardless of what they are: procedures, online foundations, instructor-led courses, augmented reality, virtual reality, ongoing learning support in communities, contextualized help, and just on equipment support, whether that's remote operations or even just sharing schematics and SOPs and things like that, through one common channel. So what we see on the slide here is really an example of actually building these things one time through XML, which allows you then to just publish them out to all the different places that they need to be in all of the languages and brands and everything else at one time. So we really only create things one time, and then if we need to make a change, it changes everywhere automatically. Organizations that are really well positioned already have this in hand, and particularly with the COVID situation that we're in now, have found it very easy, quite frankly, to shift to different modalities and different ways to reach the workforce, because they're not building something new. They're always building a core piece that can be in any mode and channel that their organizations need. So once again, very important for that standardization. There's a piece around single source augmented reality as well. So I mentioned different modes and channels. One of the ways in which we do this, particularly within the space that we're all in, is through augmented reality. So the heads-up displays mounted to the hard hats that give them schematics, workflows, SOP steps, once again, and even remote operations assistance. And once again, we're not building that in isolation from everything else. We're actually sourcing into that mode and channel for our colleagues to experience, which gives us a robust set of information and data, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, with regards to how they're engaging with it and how we actually are changing workforce behavior. One of the key ways that we do this is through the Experience API. This is an open source data standard that exists. And if you're working with vendors and partners and providers right now, ask them about it. Ask them if they use XAPI. What does their data standard look like? Because we're looking for that open source data standard so that we can actually culminate all that data around all these experiences back in one place. And if we're using proprietary data formats, it's not so easy to do that. But just as a primer to XAPI, and you can research this more if you're interested on your own, it's a syntax that gives us really clean data around what's happening in our workforce. There's always a piece of every data statement that has a people part, so it tells us who, it tells us what they're doing, and what objects they're acting on, which is really, really important. It also gives us additional parameters. What are the results of their actions? So if we're in an operational situation in which there are parameters that are falling out of limits, and Jennifer is operating a piece of equipment and needs to take a quick decision and change something, what change did she make? What action did she take? And then what were the results of that action? And furthermore, what was the context, right? What was the operational parameter that was trending out of limits? What do we know about the environment in this situation? This is already a data standard, and it's of huge, huge importance to us because it gives us lots of great information about what we're doing and how our workforce is developing. You can see some of this listed on the screen here in terms of a particular example where we're actually looking at a mud gun. Once again, this comes from a mining example, but we can actually see an actor, a person, what they're doing, that they're basically closed a hatch on a piece of equipment. And even in virtual reality, these are the kinds of things that we're expecting to see, not just someone completed it and they got a score and they answered certain questions right, but what did they actually do in the operational environment that we placed them in? We see this with simulators as well. So this is another great example of XAPI statements coming from a physical simulator. This one happens to be operations of equipment. So you can see that they're applying the service brake and the accelerator simultaneously, right? So it gives a good idea of what exactly we're seeing from a behavioral perspective. This one is fun as well. This is an example of facilitated reality. So this is a virtual environment, but real people. So a facilitator on the other end of this virtual environment kind of driving this person that I'm speaking to and having her react to the things that I do. We see this a lot with building skills around leadership, problem solving, how to collaborate with colleagues in a safe space. And once again, pulling out that data that helps us to see what behaviors or decisions our colleagues take in those experiences. We can personalize virtual reality as we start to get more advanced around this and actually take the decisions that people have taken previously in different environments and actually start to adapt the environment to give them different challenges based upon the skills that they already have and the decisions they've taken before. So that's very nice as well. And then another piece that's really interesting is there's a lot of things emerging on the market with regards to actually taking different VR experiences that are built by different vendors and putting them all together in one place, once again, so that we can actually deploy this out to the workforce at scale and get those data points back that we want to see. What are the behaviors that we're expecting to see? Are we changing those behaviors? What does that look like? And how is that data coming then back into our organization in what's called a learning record store? So that's where those XAPI statements are stored that show us what people actually do. And it's really important that that data is org defined because once again, it plays into your scenarios, it plays into your operational parameters and all of the things that you're looking to see from an organizational perspective. But all that said, we can standardize all we want at scale, and unless we recognize diversity, we will not see the real strategic value of our organizational strategies come to life. So when we recognize diversity, it's really important to understand that people are the strategy of a sustainable organization. We want to make them visible. Often we're talking about changing skills and how are we going to get people these skills and everything else. But at the end of the day, what's really important actually is for us to be able to see the skills we have. How can we engage in workforce and capability curation across an organization, link continuous feedback to performance, make capability expectations evergreen and fully transparent so that anyone in the organization can see what capabilities or skills are required for any role. We also want to measure real-time capability development and look at how it correlates to the different experiences that our colleagues are having so that we can actually increase or accelerate that development. Which is nice. And then obviously lots around strategic planning and the ways in which we decide, do we recruit people or do we actually have people in our own organizations that are actually well positioned to do some of the things that we need, regardless of what their job is today. So this is just an example, but over the last 100 years, a lot of us in organizations have not had the benefit of a lot of technology to do this. So we may have had some kind of CV from a person that gave us some basic information. If we were really sophisticated, we were looking for keywords in that and pulling that out and those kinds of things. But time has changed and technology's changed. And so I'd like to share a few pieces with you around what we may have been missing by just pulling out those keywords out of CVs. All right. What we see on the screen is actually taken from an oral kind of video storytelling object from the same kind of scenario as the person's CV that we just saw. And we start to see a whole different piece come alive in terms of the person, their skill set, what they do in and out of their daily work for the organization, in their community and everything else, where they may be using skills that we haven't thought to ask them about and they haven't thought to tell us about because it's not their job description. So how do we do that and do it at scale? Once again, AI is proving incredibly helpful with this, with regards to learning about people through the information that they provide, and actually recommending skills to them that they may have based on skills that they've already said that they have, or different pieces of information that we have about them, whether that's them telling a story, which I think is really significant for some of our frontline workers, or typing out a CV, which is also important as well. There's a whole way to do this and create human validation around this as well, whereby the AI makes a recommendation to the person of a skill that they might have, and they either accept or reject it. And once they do that, the work teams that they work with have the opportunity to give a viewpoint on a daily basis or weekly basis or whatever, how they're applying that skill and at what level, which really gives us that step change around actually seeing for the first time ever capability development happen in real time. It's really important to actually incorporate this into continuous feedback. So for organizations that are really taking that next step in terms of moving into a continuous feedback performance management system instead of maybe an appraisal system or things like that, or maybe even just complementing it, we imply this as well. So what are the core skills or the target skills that that individual is working on, and how do we surface those to the people that they work with, so as they give that continuous feedback, they know what skills that person is working on and can give them a viewpoint as to how they're actually developing in real time. This also plays out well, particularly with the AR headsets, because as we have remote operations and support in play, they can do the same thing as they're observing someone do the work on site. This is important to us because it gives us an individual view linked to experiences of how someone's skill profile is moving, morphing, and changing, and then dynamically we can provide different experiences to them based upon how they're developing and the ways in which they want to develop. We can also infer potential skills. So the AI is great about saying, because you have this skill and this skill, you might also have this skill, which once again, sometimes gives people an opportunity to reflect and say, I actually do have that skill. I never would have thought to tell you about it because it's not my job right now. And I didn't even think about it, quite honestly. So lots of different opportunities there. And then once again, and this is just an example on the screen, it's not any real data from any real organization because that's definitely intellectual property and very valuable strategic information. But it gives us an organizational view of current and future state against those different scenarios. What skills do I have? How strong are those skills? And am I really prepared for scenarios as they play out? We can then start to really do amazing things around predicting and doing comparative analytics. So once again, what skills were acquired, what capability was acquired, how much of it, and what did it correlate to? In this particular example, we're slicing and dicing around assessment of potential and how are these different populations evolving over time. You can drill down to any specific demographic. But once again, having that data is the way in which we do that, which really gets us to a different place. It positions us in a way in which we can truly get to capability-based organizational development, where everything is tied together: recruitment, accelerated onboarding. I can onboard someone faster if I've already learned from them in the recruiting process a bit around their capability and their profile, so that I can actually accelerate their onboarding from the time that they're hired or even pre-hire, which reduces time to competence and increases development. We've also got the performance and real-time capability development that's also very, very important. And then of course, the strategic workforce planning and global mobility aspects that come from all of this data. So finally, just a small piece with regards to how this all comes together. How do we start to reinvent the workplace with this reduction in variation in equipment and processes, and really a full realization of the diversity within our organization? So as we start to do this, we're looking at evolving equipment, evolving processes, and evolving people. And there are great pieces of technology that are in place right now to actually do just this. If you are measuring and tracking those key operational parameters in your workforce, you can actually use that to then trigger interactions for people, where we give them process information, connection to other colleagues, remote operations assistance, all those particular pieces based on what's actually happening in their operational environment at that time, which gives personalized intervention points for that person that help them to make better decisions, work on those complex decision-making skills, and continue to build and develop their skill set. We can also correlate the capability development that comes from that with continuous process improvement. So really quickly, there's a couple pieces to look at as we kind of start to round this out in terms of how all this works. As we look at the slide that's present here, there's a lot going on, and we won't go into great detail about this, but the key highlights are kind of the teal parts at the top. So if we know about a person's capability profile and we have IoT inputs around the environment, and then we take that capability information and the content or processes or schematics, we can actually personalize an experience for someone that leads to them getting a particular intervention at a particular time. And then actually, if you skip down to the next teal bar, resolve the operational context through IoT, which then gives us a great view as to how we've actually done dynamic real-time continuous improvement in the flow of work and simultaneously developed capabilities in so doing. IoT is great around this, and there's a lot of emerging work in this space. I'm quite passionate about this currently, around using IoT data as anticipatory learning. So how do we actually take the data that we have? In this particular example, we've got information about the environment, information around people, information around processes, and actually bring all that together and personalize and experience for someone right then and there at the time in which they need it, that is going to give them the tools that they need to be successful and to really continuously improve our operations. So as we look at this, there's a great opportunity to use that operational data plus a personal capability profile to really personalize an intervention or an experience that results in those great XAPI statements that say, in this context, Jennifer did this to this piece of equipment, and we saw a resolution in the sense that the operational parameters resolved. So lots of great work in this space and lots of opportunity that really do put our people ahead of the change and position them quite well for the future. And in closing, I wanted to just share a quote that I think is really relevant to all of this work from Jim Rohn. It says, "The big challenge is to become all that you have the possibility of becoming. You cannot believe what it does to the human spirit to maximize your human potential and stretch yourself to the limit." And I know that's what we're all after in this great quest to continue to evolve as organizations. And it's just such a pleasure and an honor to have shared this with you all today. I do thank you, and I look forward to hearing what some of the rest of you are doing around some of these aspects as well. You can always reach out to me if you have any additional questions, or there's collaboration that you want to do around some of the innovation that you're doing in your own organization. Thank you.
Terrific. This is terrific, Jennifer. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing. There you go. And I'm going to come on here. And as you're speaking, there are a number of questions that came up. So we'll share those with you. Thank you, first of all, for that coverage. Very super interesting topic, because there was some commentary that was going on as you're presenting. And some people talking about their own organizations, and it's like, this is not what my learning and development department looks like. It's like, and I think that's an experience that a lot of people can relate to, that learning development has been slow to adapt a lot of technologies. I mean, we still, I think that in certain organizations, we're still in the mode of digitizing some paper forms type of thing, and they call that,
right,
technology advancement. So, so terrific. There is so much that we can go deeper on here. So let me try to, one of the questions was, and trying to simplify this whole universe is, tell us about someone who's beginning on this journey.
Yes.
You have clearly done quite a bit. How would you start something like what you have there, what you have laid out for us?
Yeah, regardless of how much technology you have access to, there's some really practical things that you can do right now to start to move in this direction. And some of you may have already done some of these things, but it's worth looking at, right? How are you describing work in your organization? Are you describing it by your org structure, or are you describing it by disciplines, broad disciplines that will always be those disciplines regardless of how your org structure may change? That's definitely something to think about. And how is that accessible to people? Can it be used? That leads into things around taxonomies and classifications. Do you have a taxonomy within your organization? Do you have a way to classify these things so that you can once again connect people to the work that's meaningful within the organization? It doesn't take necessarily really fancy tech and AI and all those kinds of things to do some of that work. It's great foundation to start to think about. Another practical thing is really, do you have clear behavioral targets that are set up for your workforce in your high risk areas? That's a place to definitely start, right? If we look at the areas in which there are the highest degrees of risk, it's pretty powerful to compare that to your risk matrix. And by the way, if you don't have a risk matrix, another point to look at. But how does that combine with your SOPs, right? Do you actually know which parts of your SOPs correlate to your risk matrix? Where are the places where it might be helpful to connect somebody with a person with an experience to measure their behavior, and what behavior are we actually looking for? Those are those org-driven pieces that are really important, and I think regardless of the amount of tech that you have, you can do. You know which parts of your operation have the most risk. Have you clearly defined what behaviors you're expecting from people in those risk scenarios? And then do you have a way to measure or track those? I think those are all really good first steps in terms of preparing yourself to really do this at mass scale.
That really is very helpful to just lay out like you have the approaches and the structure maybe that you have to think about before you really start thinking about bringing some of the technologies that you talked about. So assuming that that structure has been laid out as you described, what would be the first maybe technological piece that you may want to bring in, or maybe a sequence of technologies that you bring into that structure now?
Yes. So one of the most important pieces where you have the opportunity to realize a great amount of value very quickly is through technology like the learning content management system piece that I spoke about, which once again allows you to create things in XML so that they can be augmented reality, virtual reality, web-based, paper-based, whatever they need to be all at once, right? And that you can deploy them out to people in different ways. Typically with that learning content management piece, there is a repository piece that involves a learning record store. And that learning record store is also very important because that actually stores all of these XAPI statements around what people are doing in their real work and in some of these virtual scenarios as well. And also very, very important, this deviates a little bit from the traditional view around learning systems and things whereby what we started with technology in this space long ago were only learning management systems, which are different, right? They basically say you must take this course, and then you take it, and then it says, yes, thank you, very good, you did that, and here is your score. That's not really what we're looking for here. That could be important as well, and we're still measuring all of that. But what we're looking to see is, did we actually shift workforce behavior and develop capability in our workforce? So that learning record store is what stores all of those XAPI statements, and that's something really important to consider. The final piece I'll talk about is for those of you that are deploying augmented reality on headsets or VR, virtual reality, which seems to be very popular at this point. The one thing I would urge you is, if you've got different providers that are working on those, think about getting a portal to bring all those things together so that you can standardize what the data is that you want out of those. And actually, get the good, rich information that you need from them. They're virtual reality in particular is very expensive. So without actually seeing your return on investment there, it's difficult to decide what to do next with it. So there's lots of great technology around that too. If you already have a bunch of those experiences where you can pull them all together in one place to be able to see them and action them and actually know if they're effective in changing behavior or not.
Very good, very helpful. Laura Pascali has a bit of a challenging question here for you, and
Okay.
and I really like this question because it goes deeper in strategic. So, and her question is, when it becomes strategic to change the workforce rather than investing in developing the workforce. So that's that's a tough situation sometimes that we can think altruistically that we can redirect labor and we can retrain people to do different tasks, and that sounds very good, but there are certain limitations and there's on doing that. And just your experience on settings where it may be difficult to upskill the workforce and you may need to replace. So if you could talk a little bit about the dynamic of developing versus replacing.
Absolutely, and I spoke about that a little bit when I talked about that capability-driven org structure, right? Because recruitment is important as well. One of the things that I found the most amazing around some of this work, which I think I just want to share as an anecdote for you, is when we started to apply AI to actually look at the concept of related skills. And what I mean by that is Jennifer doesn't have this skill, right? And this is a skill we need. But what are the cluster of other skills that would indicate that that person could potentially accelerate into the skill we need faster? Fascinating from an AI perspective, because it actually starts to give you a different view and say, okay, if I look at this as binary, right? It's either we have it or we don't. That's one picture. But how do I look at this and say, wow, here's this group, or they may not even be in a group, these people that are scattered across my organization that are developing at a very rapid rate, because once again, we're getting real-time reads on them all the time, right? And have this cluster of related skills that would infer that we could, if we wanted to, accelerate their development very quickly into the skill that they don't have that we need. That changes a lot from a strategic perspective, because we know it's very expensive to recruit new talent, to bring new talent in, and it's very necessary at times. But where are areas of opportunity in our organization already today? Can we see them? And my challenge to everyone is, can you see them? Can you look at the scenario I'm talking about and say, okay, we don't have the skill, but all of these people, the data is telling us, if we invested, the next month or two in these people, they could already do it. That gives us a different mix in our recruiting profile than we would currently see today. We're still going to recruit. We absolutely need to. But it maybe changes the mix of what we're doing internally versus how we're recruiting, because that organizational knowledge is also very important, right? And when we bring people in that new, they don't have that organizational context, particularly in our more strategic roles, to be able to get up and running quickly. So just all kinds of things to think about. It's not one or the other, it's the mix. And do you have the right data to inform your strategy with regards to what that mix should be? And that's my challenge, is I'm not sure that all organizations currently do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing your passion, your incredible insights and knowledge about in this area, and we're very grateful for you to take the time to share that with us.
Thanks, Jose. It's been a great pleasure. I can't wait to hear what others are doing. It's really an exciting time to be in an innovation and strategic space.
Very much so. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this segment of Oil and Gas Live. We're going to see you back at the top of the hour, where Rick Highland, the Executive Vice President of RLG International, is going to discuss capital project transformation. What do we need to do to change the performance of capital projects in a time of great disruption and dislocation? And capital project performance, especially mega projects, has been an issue for decades. And could this be an opportunity to significantly change the performance of these projects, and how can we do that? What are some of the approaches that great enduring organizations are thinking strategically about, but most important, executing on? So I will see you at the top of the hour, and I hope that you have continued to have these great questions for Rick later on in that segment. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.